Okay, so you clearly weren't paying attention to Ephesians 2, starting at verse 10, right? For we are his workmanship, created in Yeshua Messiah unto good works, right? So you're created to do these good works. What are the good works? It's keeping the covenants of promise, right? That's what you get in the next few verses, which God hath before ordained that we should walk in them. Right, God before ordained that you should walk in keeping the rainbow covenant, ordained from times of Noah, right, in Genesis 6 through 9, and then the 10 Commandments, right, because you're supposed to be grafted into Israel. I'm going to read that in Romans 11. Wherefore remember that ye being in times past Gentiles in the flesh, right, in times past you were Gentile, no longer are you supposed to be a Gentile. In the flesh, who are called the uncircumcision by that which is called the circumcision in the flesh made by hands, that at that time, right, when you were a Gentile, ye were without Yeshua, being aliens from the commonwealth of Israel, and strangers from the covenants of promise, having no hope, and without God in the world. Right, so when you were a Gentile, you were estranged, like you didn't have anything. You didn't have Yeshua, you didn't have God, you had no hope, you weren't keeping the covenants of promise, you weren't grafted into Israel. But now, in Yeshua Messiah, ye, who sometimes were far off from those things, are made nigh, right, near, by the blood of Yeshua. For he is our peace, who hath made both one, and hath broken down the middle wall of partition between us, having abolished in his flesh the enmity, even the law of commandments ordained in ordinances. Right, so that's what Moses wrote, the sacrificial law, right, the book of the law. To make in himself of twain one new man, so making peace, and that he might reconcile both unto God in one body by the cross, the stake, having slain the enmity thereby, and came and preached peace to you which were far off, and to them that are nigh. For through him we both having access by one Spirit unto the Father. Now therefore ye are no more strangers and foreigners. Right, no more strangers and foreigners to what? You're no longer a stranger to the covenants of promise. Right, that's what you got in verse 12, right? Strangers from the covenants of promise when you were a Gentile, but you're no longer a stranger. Right, so now if you hop over to Isaiah 56, so verse 1, Thus saith Jehovah, keep ye judgment and do justice, for my salvation is near to come, and my righteousness to be revealed. Blessed is the man that doeth this, and the son of man that layeth hold on this, right? You want to be blessed, that keepeth the Sabbath from polluting it, right? The Sabbath is Saturday, begins the rising of the sun, and ends when the sun rises on Sunday. And keepeth his hand from doing any evil. Neither let the son of the stranger that hath joined himself to Jehovah speak, saying, Jehovah hath utterly separated me from his people. Neither let the eunuch say, Behold, I am a dry tree. Right, so a dry tree are those people that aren't keeping the commandments. Right, they aren't keeping the covenants of promise. Right, a green tree is those that keep the commandments. Okay, so now in Romans 11, it tells you about you being allowed to be grafted in to Israel. So starting in verse 1, I say then, hath God cast away his people? God forbid. For I also am an Israelite of the seed of Benjamin, or of the tribe of Benjamin, whatever. God hath not cast away his people which he foreknew. Wot ye not what the scripture saith of Elijah, how he maketh intercession to God against Israel, saying, Lord, they have killed thy prophets and digged down thine altars, and I am left alone, and they seek my life. Right, so something interesting in Romans 9 is that Paul calls Israel Gentiles. I'll show that real quick. Okay, so Romans 9, verse 24. Even us, whom he hath called not of the Jews only, but also the Gentiles. As he saith in Hosea, I will call them my people which were not my people, and her beloved which was not my beloved. Right, so because Israel, right, ancient Israel, did this pagan idolatry stuff, which we know today as Christmas, they were called not his people, right, and they became Gentiles because God let them get carried away into captivity of the Assyrians, and then they intermingled with the Assyrians, right, and they became just like the Gentiles, right? So you read in Deuteronomy 32 how like even the remembrance of them was forgotten. And then so if you hop over to Hosea, right? The book of Hosea is talking about Israel, but Paul is talking about Gentiles. So what's going on? Well, he's calling Israel Gentiles because they stopped keeping the covenants of promise. Because the people that are Israel are those that are keeping the covenants. The people that are Gentiles are those that are not keeping the covenants, right? That's the definition. But so now back in Romans 11, verse 4, but what saith the answer of God unto him? I have reserved to myself 7,000 men who have not bowed the knee to the image of Baal. Even so then, at this present time, also there's a remnant according to the election of grace. Grace is conviction, or you got to check the Strong's Concordance G5485. It's divine influence upon the heart that convicts you to keep the Ten Commandments. And if by grace, then it is no more of works. Otherwise, grace is no more works. Or grace is no more works. But if it be of works, then it is no more grace. Otherwise, work is no more work. Right? Because it's God's grace that's convicting you to keep the commandments. It's not you just doing it yourself. What then? Israel hath not obtained that which he seeketh for, but the election hath obtained it, and the rest were blinded. According as it is written, God hath given them the spirit of slumber, eyes that they should not see, and ears that they should not hear, unto this day. And David saith, let their table be made a snare, and a trap, and a stumbling block, and a recompense unto them. Let their eyes be darkened, that they may not see, and bow down their back always. I say then, have they stumbled that they should fall? God forbid. But rather, through their fall, salvation has come unto the Gentiles. Right, and then you're going to see how in the next few verses, it talks about the Gentiles being grafted in to the olive tree. Right, so if the Gentiles are grafted into the olive tree, now they're going to be Israel. Now if the falling of them be the riches of the world, and the diminishing of them the riches of the Gentiles, how much more their fullness? For I speak to you Gentiles, inasmuch as I am an apostle of the Gentiles, I magnify mine office. And so an interesting that you get is when Yeshua is saying that, where I go, you cannot come. And the Pharisees think like, is he going to go to the dispersed amongst the Gentiles? Right, because Israel was dispersed amongst the Gentiles. And so that's why they're just called as Gentiles. If by any means I may provoke to emulation them which are my flesh, and might save some of them. For if the casting away of them be the reconciling of the world, what shall the receiving of them be but life from the dead? For if the first root be holy, the lump is also holy, and if the root be holy, so are the branches. And if some of the branches be broken off, and thou, being a wild olive tree, were grafted in among them, and with them partakest of the roots and the fatness of the olive tree, boast not against the branches, but if thou boast, thou bearest not the root, but the root thee. Right? Gentiles were grafted into Israel, and so now they're Israel if they keep the covenants, right? If they continue in it. Thou wilt say then, the branches were broken off, that I might be grafted in. Well, because of unbelief, they were broken off. But what did they do? They did pagan idolatry, right? And then when they went into the Gentiles, they started eating unclean animals, right? You get that even in Ezekiel 4, but I won't get into that. And so, because through unbelief, which is disobedience, they broke the covenants, God let them go their way. The same thing has happened to the Christian church to this day. Because of unbelief, they were broken off, and thou standest by faith. Be not high-minded, but fear, right? Keep the commandments, because that's what fear means. If you read Deuteronomy 6, you see that. For if God spared not the natural branches, take heed lest he also spare not thee. Right, so make sure that you keep the covenant's promise to be grafted into Israel, or else you're going to be cut off as well. Behold, therefore, the goodness and severity of God on them which fell severity, but toward thee goodness, if thou continue in his goodness. Otherwise, thou also shalt be cut off. And they also, if they abide not still in unbelief, and shall be grafted in, for God is able to graft them in again. For if thou wert cut out of the olive tree, which is wild by nature, and wert grafted contrary to nature into a good olive tree, how much more shall these, which by nature, by the natural branches, be grafted in their own olive tree? But yeah, I won't have time to continue. But yeah, like Israel became Gentiles because they broke the covenant, right? So now for you to become Israel, you got to get grafted in by keeping the covenants, right? You see more about this even in Isaiah 44, where these people spring up and they surname themselves as Israel, Jacob, and I am the Lord's, where that's happening today.